The train's whistle echoed across the prairie, a long and mournful cry that seemed to carry with it every dream, every regret, every secret the passengers aboard carried westward. The car smelled of coal smoke and dust, with the rattling of windows matching the beat of nervous hearts. Among those sitting stiffly on the hard wooden benches was a young woman named Clara, her gloved hands folded tight in her lap. She was not meant to be here. This ticket, this journey, this future, it was supposed to belong to her sister. Emma had been the one who answered the advertisement from the rancher in Wyoming Territory, a man searching for a wife to share his land, his work, and his name. Emma was the bold one, the one who had declared that love could grow from necessity, that marriage didn't always need to start with a courtship. But when fever struck her down in the spring and left her too weak to travel, the family had turned to Clara, younger, quieter, and still nursing her own hidden sorrows. She had been asked, no, pressed, to go in her sister's place. The letter from the rancher had been carefully folded and unfolded so many times the paper was soft at its creases. His words were plain, practical, almost stern. He spoke of acres of land, of cattle needing tending, of winters that froze rivers solid and summers that burned grass to tinder. And yet, tucked between the lines of duty, Clara had sensed a yearning for companionship, a loneliness that echoed her own. She read the letter now for the 100th time, though her eyes blurred with worry. When you arrive, I will meet you at the station. I will be a man in a black hat with a chestnut horse tied nearby. She knew what he expected to see. Her sister, strong and smiling, ready to tackle the frontier. Instead, he would see Clara, smaller, paler, bearing the weight of a heart that had already been bruised by betrayal back east. She feared he would take one look at her and send her back on the very next train. As the train slowed, screeching against iron wheels, Clara's stomach turned cold. Outside the window stretched the raw expanse of the American West, endless grasslands rippling beneath the sky, broken by distant buttes and the sharp line of mountains rising against the horizon. A place as wild as it was unforgiving, where only the strong endured. The platform was nearly empty when she stepped down, her carpet bag clutched tightly. A few townsfolk gathered at the far end, gossiping, a child tugging at her mother's skirts. But then she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, a figure cut from the land itself. His black hat shadowed his eyes. But even from a distance, Clara felt the weight of his gaze fix on her. Beside him, the chestnut horse shifted restlessly, its reins looped over a post. Her heart hammered. She had thought of this moment 100 times on the train, yet nothing prepared her for the reality of him. There was something carved into his face that spoke of hard years and harder choices, a mixture of strength and sorrow that drew her in and frightened her all at once. He stepped forward slowly, boots striking wood with a deliberate rhythm. When he stopped before her, silence seemed to stretch between them, heavy with all the things she could not yet explain. He looked at her carefully, his brow furrowing as though searching her face for answers. "You're not her," he said finally, his voice low, steady, but laced with suspicion. Clara swallowed hard. This was the moment, the truth pressing against her lips, the fear of rejection nearly choking her. Yet beneath that fear stirred something else, something she could not name, the faintest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, this man had not only been waiting for her sister, maybe he had been waiting for her all along. The silence between them was as sharp as a blade. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the rancher's words lingered in the air. "You're not her." She had known it would come to this moment, but somehow she had hoped he wouldn't notice, or that he would accept the truth quietly. Instead, his eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his black hat, searched her face with an intensity that made her tremble. "No," she whispered, her voice fragile as the prairie wind. "I am not." Her hands twisted around the worn handle of her carpetbag, knuckles pale. "My sister. She fell ill. She couldn't travel. They asked me to come in her place." She dared to lift her gaze, meeting his eyes for just a heartbeat. "My name is Clara." The rancher's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, his silence heavier than any words. Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. She thought he might turn, swing into the saddle of that restless chestnut, and leave her standing alone on the platform with nothing but a ticket back east. But then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "You should have written me." His tone was flat, but beneath it simmered something. Disappointment, perhaps, or anger restrained. "I agreed to marry Emma. I didn't send for you." Clara felt her throat close. Shame prickled at her skin, hot and suffocating. I know, she said softly, but I couldn't let her dreams die. And my family, they needed this union as much as she did. If you send me back, it will ruin us all. Her honesty seemed to strike him like a blow. His expression hardened, yet his eyes, gray as storm clouds, flickered with something else, some unspoken struggle. He glanced around at the few onlookers whispering from a distance, then back at Clara, weighing her as though she were cattle at auction. I'm Ethan, he said finally, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. Ethan Barrett. I own 300 head of cattle and more land than a single man can work alone. I needed a wife, not only for company, but for survival. Your sister understood that when she agreed. Do you? Clara swallowed, her lips trembling. I understand survival better than you think. Memories pressed against her. The cold of long winters back east when the firewood ran out. The bitter shame of betrayal when the man she once trusted chose another. She had left all that behind, but the scars still lingered. I may not be Emma, but I am not weak. Ethan studied her again, eyes narrowing as though testing the truth of her words. Then, without warning, he reached for her carpet bag. Clara gasped, half in protest, but his grip was steady, not unkind. Come on, he said. We've got a long ride ahead. My ranch is a half day from here. Her heart stumbled. He was not sending her back, not yet at least. Relief swept through her, tangled with a strange new fear. She followed him across the platform, her skirts swishing around her ankles as the wide-open land yawned before her. The chestnut horse snorted, stamping its hooves as Ethan lifted her bag onto the back of his wagon. He extended a calloused hand to help her up, his touch firm and warm despite the chill in the air. Clara climbed into the seat, settling beside him as he took the reins. With a sharp flick, the horses lurched forward, wheels creaking over dirt. As the town faded behind them, the land opened wide, stretching endless and wild. Grass bent in waves beneath the wind, and the sky stretched so vast it felt as though it might swallow her whole. Clara clutched her shawl tighter, the enormity of this place pressing against her chest. Wyoming territory isn't kind to the faint of heart, Ethan said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Storms come without warning. Winters will freeze the marrow in your bones. And outlaws, well, they don't think twice before spilling blood. You sure you're ready for that? Clara's fingers curled in her lap. I wouldn't have come if I weren't. He gave a dry chuckle, though there was no humor in it. We'll see. For hours they rode, the sun sinking lower, painting the prairie gold and crimson. Silence hung between them, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the cry of distant hawks. Clara's mind churned with doubts, fears, and a fragile thread of hope. She had been chosen by circumstance, by desperation, by fate, but she longed to be chosen for herself, for who she truly was. At last, as the sky deepened to twilight, Ethan pointed toward the dark silhouette of a house in the distance. There, he said. That's home. Clara stared, breath-catching. The ranch rose from the land like a fortress built of weathered timber, surrounded by wide pens and outbuildings. Beyond, cattle grazed against the fading light. It was harsh, untamed, and yet somehow beautiful. As the wagon rolled closer, Clara felt the weight of the future settle on her shoulders. This was no longer a dream her sister had dreamed. This was hers now, and it would demand everything she had to give. She didn't know if Ethan Barrett would ever truly see her, or if his heart would always belong to the bride he thought he'd been promised. But as the stars began to scatter across the velvet sky, Clara made a silent vow. She would survive this place. She would earn her place here, and she would prove, perhaps to him, but mostly to herself, that she was worth choosing. The ranch house loomed larger as the wagon creaked into the yard, its timbers dark with age, its roof patched from seasons of storms. It was not a house of elegance or comfort, but of endurance, built to withstand wind and snow, built for survival more than beauty. Clara took it in with wide eyes, her heart pounding at the thought that this rugged fortress on the open land, was to be her home. Ethan set the brake, climbing down with the ease of a man who had repeated the motion 1,000 times. He reached up, his hand firm around Clara's arm as he helped her from the wagon. Though his touch was brief, it lingered in her mind, warm against the cool evening air. You'll be wanting supper, he said, voice gruff. There's stew in the pot. It won't be fancy, but it'll fill your stomach. Clara nodded, though her nerves prickled. She followed him to the porch, the boards creaking beneath her boots. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and leather, of dried herbs hanging from rafters and earth tracked in on boots. The house was plain with only the barest touches of homeliness. A quilt draped over a chair, a Bible worn from use, a few photographs whose faces were long faded. It was a man's dwelling, stark and utilitarian with little sign of softness. Ethan lit a lantern, its glow spilling across rough-hewn beams. "Sit," he told her, gesturing toward the table. She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap as he ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her. The broth was thin, the meat tough, but hunger made it taste rich. She ate quietly, aware of Ethan across the table, his presence filling the room like another wall. Finally, he broke the silence. "You say your sister was too sick to come." Clara lowered her spoon. "Yes, she wanted to, but the fever left her weak. She may never fully recover." Ethan's brow furrowed. "And your family thought to send you instead. Did they not care what I would think of the matter?" Clara hesitated, shame twisting inside her. They cared more for survival than appearances. Emma was their hope for a better life, for security. When she could not go, they turned to me. She lifted her chin, forcing her voice steady. "I came because I could not bear to see their hopes die. I came because I, too, seek a new beginning." Ethan studied her, his gaze unreadable. "You're braver than you look," he said at last. "But bravery alone won't see you through out here." The words stung, though she knew they were true. She finished her meal in silence, the weight of his scrutiny pressing on her. When the bowl was empty, Ethan stood, his chair scraping across the floor. "You'll take the room upstairs," he said. "It was meant to be my wife's chamber, though." He trailed off, jaw tightening, as if the word itself carried a heaviness. "I'll not press you into anything tonight. You'll need rest." Clara's cheeks burned at the unspoken meaning in his words. She murmured her thanks, then climbed the narrow staircase, lantern in hand. The room was sparse but clean, with a simple bed covered in a patchwork quilt. She sat on its edge, heart pounding, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls. Alone, the tears she had held back all day finally broke free. They slid silently down her cheeks, not of regret but of exhaustion and fear. She had crossed half a continent, stepped into a stranger's life, and now lay in a bed meant for another woman. The vastness of her choice pressed down on her, but beneath it flickered a fragile ember of determination. She would not falter. She could not. Morning came harsh and early. The crowing of a rooster pulled Clara from restless sleep. When she descended the stairs, Ethan was already outside. His shirt sleeves rolled, his broad frame bent over a saddle he was mending. He glanced up as she stepped into the yard, squinting against the rising sun. "Best you learn the chores," he said. "This isn't a life for idleness." And so the day began. Clara found herself thrust into work she had never known back east, feeding chickens, hauling water from the well, hanging linen stiff with prairie wind. Her hands blistered, her muscles ached, but with each task she pushed harder, determined to prove she belonged. Ethan watched her from time to time, his expression unreadable, though once she thought she saw the faintest curve of approval at the corner of his mouth. By midday, her skirts were dust-stained, her hair loose around her face, but a strange pride filled her. She was learning, enduring, shaping herself to this new life. Yet not all the eyes upon her were kind. That afternoon, Ethan hitched the wagon and drove her into town for supplies. The streets were narrow, lined with false front buildings, the air thick with the scent of horses and smoke. Townsfolk turned to stare as Clara stepped down, whispers rippling through the crowd. "That's the new bride," she heard one woman murmur, her tone sharp as a knife. "Though she don't look like the one he sent for." Another voice mocking, "Poor Ethan Barrett. Sent for one woman, got saddled with another." Clara's cheeks burned, shame prickling hot against her skin. She lowered her gaze, clutching her shawl tighter as she followed Ethan into the general store. Inside, the shelves brimmed with flour, beans, coffee, bolts of fabric, rifles gleaming behind the counter. The shopkeeper greeted Ethan with a nod, but when his eyes flicked to Clara, suspicion shadowed his face. "So this is your bride?" he said slowly. "Don't much resemble the one you spoke of." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's my wife," he said flatly, the words carrying a weight Clara had not expected. "That's all that matters." Something shifted in her chest at his declaration. Small, fragile, but real. For the first time, he had claimed her not as a mistake, not as an interloper, but as his wife. The sting of gossip still cut deep, but those words steadied her like a hand reaching out in the dark. Yet as they left the store and stepped back into the glaring sun, Clara felt the storm clouds gathering. The West was a place of harsh eyes and harsher tongues, and she knew the battle ahead was not only against the land, but against suspicion, gossip, and the ghosts of expectations. Still, as she climbed into the wagon beside Ethan, she stole a glance at him, at the strength in his profile, at the lines of hardship etched into his face. Something inside her whispered that this man, stern and wounded though he was, might one day see her not as a substitute, but as the woman meant for him. But fate was rarely kind in the West, and even as hope stirred, danger was drawing near, danger that would test them both far more than gossip ever could. The wagon rattled along the rutted road back toward the ranch, the sun high and merciless above them. Clara sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart still stinging from the cruel whispers of the townsfolk, though Ethan's words inside the general store, "She's my wife, that's all that matters," had steadied her. Doubt still gnawed at her. She wondered if he had spoken only to silence the shopkeeper, or if in some guarded part of him he truly meant it. Ethan drove in silence, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the reins steady in his hands. He was a man of few words, and the silence between them often felt like a canyon, wide and daunting. Yet Clara began to notice the ways he showed himself in smaller gestures, the way he slowed the wagon when the ruts grew deep, sparing her the jolt, the way his hand shifted slightly, ready to steady her should the seat tilt. These unspoken kindnesses gave her courage, though she dared not speak them aloud. When they reached the ranch, the sky had begun to dim, streaked with lavender and rose. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her body weary, her spirit still heavy. She turned toward the house, but Ethan's voice halted her. "You held yourself well today," he said, his tone measured but not unkind. "Town can be cruel, especially to outsiders. Don't let their words take root." Clara looked at him, startled by the softness threading through his voice. "Their words don't wound me half as much as the thought that I might not belong here," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be a burden to you, Ethan." He studied her, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "A burden?" he repeated, almost scoffing. "You're strong for someone who's never set foot on this land before. Most would have run home by now. You didn't." His words lingered with her long after he turned away to tend the horses. That night, as Clara lay in the narrow bed upstairs, she turned them over in her mind. There was strength in her, he saw it even when she doubted herself. And perhaps if she could endure this land and its trials, she might earn more than his tolerance. She might earn his respect. The following days tested that resolve. Dawn after dawn, Ethan set her to work beside him, mending fences, driving cattle, hauling water until her back ached. The sun burned her skin. Blisters lined her palms, and yet she found herself rising each morning with a grim determination. There was a rhythm to the ranch, harsh but steady, and slowly she began to fall into step with it. But the West was never still for long. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the prairie quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle, Ethan's gaze hardened toward the horizon. "Riders," he muttered, his hand tightening around the rifle propped against the wall. Clara followed his gaze, heart quickening as she spotted the dark silhouettes moving against the sinking sun. 3 men on horseback, their approach slow but deliberate. The riders drew closer, dust rising around them. Clara's breath caught at the sight of their faces, hard, weathered, with eyes that glinted sharp and cruel. They dismounted before the porch, spurs jangling, the stench of sweat and gunpowder clinging to them. The one in front, a man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, tipped his hat mockingly. "Evenin', Barrett," he drawled. "Heard you finally found yourself a wife. Shame your cattle might not last the season." Ethan's jaw clenched. "This is my land, Carver. You've no business here." The scarred man, Carver, smirked, his gaze sliding toward Clara. She felt it like a snake coiling around her, vile and cold. "Pretty thing," he sneered. "Don't look like she was raised for ranch work. Hope she's tougher than she looks, or the West will eat her alive." Clara stiffened, but before she could speak, Ethan stepped forward, his presence a shield. "Leave," he said, voice low and hard as iron. "You'll not speak to her, and you'll not touch a head of my cattle." Carver's smile widened, though his eyes narrowed with menace. "You've got fire, Barrett, but fire burns out quick when the winds rise. I'll be seeing you." He spat in the dirt, then swung into his saddle. His men followed, their laughter cruel as they rode off into the dusk. When they were gone, Clara realized she was trembling. Ethan's hand brushed against hers, brief, steady, grounding. "Don't fear them," he said, though his voice carried an edge she had not heard before. "They're cowards who prey on weakness. "We'll be ready if they come back." But Clara knew the look in Ethan's eyes. He had faced men like Carver before, men who would not stop until blood was spilled, and she knew too that their fragile bond, so newly forming, would be tested in fire. That night, sleep did not come easily. Clara lay awake listening to the wind whistle against the eaves, the memory of Carver's gaze burning in her mind. The West was not only a land of hardship and survival, it was a land of enemies, of danger lurking at every horizon. Yet even as fear gripped her, she felt another truth stirring within. She had chosen to come, chosen to stay, chosen to build this life, and no outlaw, no whispering townsfolk, no storm would drive her away. Still, as the coyotes howled in the distance, she could not shake the sense that something darker was drawing near. A reckoning that would force both her and Ethan to reveal the deepest parts of themselves. The days after Carver's visit were heavy with silence, the kind that presses against the skin like a storm about to break. Clara moved through her chores with restless energy, her ears tuned to every sound. The crack of distant gunfire, the restless bellow of cattle, the creak of the windmill. Each noise seemed like a warning, though no danger showed itself outright. Ethan grew more watchful too, his rifle never far from reach, his eyes sweeping the horizon whenever he stepped outside. Clara sensed the strain in him, though he rarely spoke of it. He was a man who carried his burdens in silence as though words would only make them heavier. But in the quiet of the evenings, when they sat side by side on the porch, she saw the way his shoulders remained tense, as though he expected trouble to ride up at any moment. One night, unable to bear the silence, she spoke. "Carver will come back, won't he?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the stars. "Men like him don't let go. He's been trying to push me off this land for years. He's stolen cattle, cut fences, set fire to my barns. But this ranch was my father's before me, and I'll not give it up to the likes of him." Clara's fingers tightened around the shawl draped over her shoulders. "And what if he tries to hurt you?" The words spilled out before she could stop them, raw and frightened. He turned to look at her then, his eyes steady, gray as storm clouds. "Then I'll fight him. But I won't let him touch you, Clara. That's a promise." Something in his tone, firm, resolute, almost fierce, sent a shiver through her, though not of fear. It was the first time he had spoken her name with such certainty, as though she truly belonged here. She swallowed hard, her heart twisting with emotions she dared not name. The tension grew thicker as the week wore on. Ethan began rising earlier, working later, riding the perimeter of the ranch with a grim focus. Clara insisted on helping more than before, hauling water, tending the animals, learning to load the rifle Ethan finally placed in her hands. Her hands trembled the first time she held it, but his steady guidance calmed her. "Breathe slow," he instructed, standing close behind her, his voice low near her ear. "Don't fight the weight of it. Let it rest against you. Aim true, don't rush," she fired, the shot ringing out across the open field. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but when she opened her eyes, she saw the tin can at the fence post knocked clean to the dirt. A laugh escaped her, half disbelieving. Ethan's lips curved just barely into the faintest smile. "Not bad," he murmured. That small smile, rarer than rain in the desert, filled Clara with more warmth than she had felt in years. She wanted to keep it, to draw it from him again, to see the hardness in him softened if only for her. But the West did not grant peace for long. 2 nights later, the sound of shouting split the stillness of the dark. Clara woke with a start, heart hammering. From the window she saw flames leaping into the night sky, the barn engulfed in fire. She raced down the stairs, skirts flying, as Ethan burst through the door with his rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he barked, but she followed anyway, drawn by fear and instinct. Outside, the night was chaos, cattle bellowing in panic, smoke choking the air, shadows of riders tearing across the fields. Carver's men. Clara's blood turned to ice as she caught sight of them, torches in hand, faces twisted with malice. Ethan fired, the crack of the rifle shattering the night. One rider fell, but the others kept on, circling like wolves. Clara clutched the rifle Ethan had pressed into her hands earlier that week, her mind racing with his instructions. "Breathe slow. Aim true." She raised it, her hand shaking, and fired into the dark. She did not know if she struck anyone, but the shot was enough to scatter the men, their curses echoing as they fled into the distance. When the last of the hoofbeats faded, Clara collapsed to her knees, the rifle slipping from her hands. Her chest heaved, smoke and terror choking her lungs. Ethan was beside her in an instant, his hand gripping her shoulder. You did well, he said, voice rough but steady. You were brave. She looked up at him, tears streaking through soot on her cheeks. I was so afraid. Fear's nothing to be ashamed of, he told her. It means you've got something worth protecting. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the fire, the smoke, the danger, all of it faded. It was just the two of them, bound by something deeper than duty or survival. In that instant, Clara knew she was no longer living her sister's dream. This was her life now, her fight, her love, and she would not give it up for anything. But even as she clung to that fragile certainty, the crackling barn reminded her that Carver would not stop until Ethan was broken, or worse. The battle for the ranch, for their survival, was only beginning. The barn smoldered for days, its charred timbers standing like blackened bones against the endless Wyoming sky. The smell of smoke clung to everything. Clara's hair, her clothes, the very walls of the house. She worked beside Ethan from dawn until dusk, salvaging what they could, hauling water, burying the cattle lost in the blaze. Exhaustion pressed heavy on her limbs, but she would not yield. Not when Ethan pressed on, his jaw set with grim resolve, his body carrying scars of sleepless nights. Yet Clara could see the weight in his eyes. Carver's raid had not broken him, but it had wounded more than his ranch. The pride he carried like armor was cracked, and though he never spoke of it, Clara could feel the questions gnawing at him. Could one man defend so much land? Could he keep her safe when enemies circled like vultures? She longed to ease that burden, but she did not know how. Words felt fragile in the face of such relentless danger, so she poured her heart into her labor, into proving that she was not a burden but a partner. Day after day she matched his stride, her hands blistered, her back bent, her determination as unyielding as his. Then on the 5th night after the fire, Carver returned. The warning came not with a shout or a flame, but with the eerie silence of the land itself. Clara woke to the stillness, her body tense, the hair at the back of her neck rising. She rose from her bed, clutching the rifle Ethan had insisted she keep close, and crept to the window. The moon cast a silver glow across the yard, and there, dark shapes slipping between the shadows of the corral. Her breath caught. Riders. At least half a dozen. She rushed downstairs, heart pounding, where Ethan was already pulling on his boots, his rifle in hand. Their eyes met in the dim lantern light, no words needed. The fight they had been waiting for had come. Outside, the night erupted into chaos. Carver's men thundered toward the house, their torches blazing, their shouts cutting through the still air. Ethan fired first, the shot ringing like thunder, dropping a rider from his saddle. Clara stood beside him, her body trembling but her aim steady, firing into the dark as the men closed in. Inside, Ethan shouted, but she shook her head.
I won't leave you.
The words tore from her throat with a ferocity she did not know she possessed, and for the briefest moment, amid the storm of gunfire and hooves, Ethan's eyes flicked to hers, filled with something more than anger or fear. Pride, respect. Something deeper that burned like the very fire that had consumed their barn. The battle raged, the air filled with smoke and dust, the cries of men and the desperate bellow of cattle scattering in panic. Clara reloaded with shaking hands, her heart hammering with each shot she loosed. Carver himself rode at the front, his scarred face twisted with rage, shouting orders, his revolver flashing in the moonlight. Then came the moment that would decide it all. Carver dismounted, storming forward on foot, his revolver aimed straight at Ethan. Clara saw it happen in an instant. The flash of steel, the narrowed eyes, the deadly intent. Without thinking, she raised her rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the night and Carver staggered, his gun clattering to the dirt. The fight stopped. His men, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled into the darkness, their shouts fading into the distance. The only sounds left were the rasp of Ethan's breathing, the crackle of dying torches, and Clara's own pounding heartbeat. She dropped the rifle, her hands shaking, tears blurring her vision. She had killed a man, not out of malice but out of necessity, to save the one she could not bear to lose. Ethan crossed the yard in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders, steady and sure. "Clara," he said, his voice low, raw, "you saved my life." She looked up at him, her lips trembling. "I was so afraid." "So was I," he admitted, his thumb brushing the soot from her cheek. "But you stood your ground. You faced the worst this land could throw at you, and you didn't falter. I couldn't ask for more than that. Not from a wife, not from anyone." The word wife lingered in the air, heavy with a new meaning, no longer a promise made to her sister, no longer a duty forced upon her. Clara's chest ached as tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were not of fear or shame. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to deceive you, but I wanted to belong here. To you, not as a shadow of Emma, but as myself." He cupped her face, his eyes fierce and tender all at once. "I see you, Clara. Not her, you, and I choose you. For as long as breath is in me, I choose you." The words sank deep into her, filling the hollow places carved by doubt and fear. In that moment, beneath the vast Wyoming sky surrounded by smoke and ruin and the echoes of violence, Clara knew she had found something stronger than survival, stronger than fear. She had found love, the kind born not of promises on paper, but of fire, trial, and unshakable resolve. As dawn broke, painting the horizon gold, Clara and Ethan stood together before the smoking remains of the barn. Their land had been scarred, their peace shattered, but they remained. And in the fierce, untamed heart of the West, survival was not just about enduring. It was about building something worth enduring for. Hand in hand, they turned back toward the house. The future would be hard, filled with storms and battles yet to come. But Clara no longer feared it, for she was no longer the girl sent in her sister's place. She was Clara Barrett, wife of Ethan Barrett, partner of his ranch, keeper of his heart. And together, they would face whatever the frontier dared to bring.